Awesome. Well, it is exciting to be with you all today. Many of you know my family has been attending worship, and it's a real joy to be able to preach to the congregation this morning and to share some of the lessons I'm learning as Faith in Public Life works around the country. Before I read the word from Isaiah, I want to remind us of the historical context that Isaiah was living in. Remember that he was a prophet during a time of crisis in Israel. Israel had been torn apart by civil war. In fact, King Solomon had been oppressing his own people. He was not the wise king that we're sometimes taught of. He used slave labor to actually build a temple to a God who hated slavery. He built up Israel's armies by overtaxing and impoverishing his own people. He worshiped the god Moloch that demanded child sacrifice. And in the wake of that civil war caused by Solomon, the empire of Babylon invaded. And by the rivers of Babylon, a once mighty and godly nation sat down and wept. And these conditions might feel familiar to us today. We too are a nation that claimed to be a godly nation, but used slavery and Jim Crow to build white wealth. We too have built up our armies, especially as we're seeing now in the form of police, militarizing the police and using tax dollars to criminalize people rather than build safe communities and take care of one another. We too have demanded child sacrifice, cutting budgets that support children, and separating children at the border, immigrant children. And many of us have committed idolatry by worshiping a white nationalist Jesus rather than the brown-skinned Palestinian Jew who lived under a brutal empire and taught us how to love one another. And now we see our own nation crumbling under the weight of a pandemic, more accurately, our failure to respond to one because of the kind of president we have elected. So in this moment in our nation's history, when everything is falling apart and when the veil is being drawn back on our own brokenness, I offer you these beautiful words from Isaiah, this marvelous vision that he lifts up in the midst of chaos. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The word of God.
Thanks be to God.
Behold, I do a new thing. Do you see it? Can you perceive it? Say some translations. Isaiah celebrates God is on the move. God is doing a new thing, just like when God helped lead the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt and through a threatening desert. Many of us have supported those who are protesting police brutality, and we're taking steps as a congregation to examine our white privilege to be able to see this new thing that God is doing. And yet, much more will be required of us, for those of us who are white in particular, to be able to fulfill God's vision of a new thing. I believe that today, in order to perceive God's new thing, those of us who are white will have to challenge ourselves even further to accept Black realities. To say this another way, we'll have to think about how being white blinds us to the reality of Black folks and to the white supremacist system we have been living in for hundreds of years. So today I want to talk about this concept of whiteness and why it's so important for us spiritually. And I want to encourage everyone to participate in the table talks that are coming up. I'm really excited. I just finished this book and I'm looking forward to reading the other one. And I need a place to talk about it. It's really intense. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. I've been involved in social justice work for years, but I'm realizing in this work that there are so many ways in which I have been blind to my whiteness. So I say to you with all humility and compassion, if you are a white person and not feeling uncomfortable in this moment, and if you're not feeling defensive, I'm worried for you. You should be feeling challenged. And if you are feeling defensive at times and angry and frustrated, I say on one level, good for you. You are feeling it. Sit with that feeling of defensiveness. Breathe deep. Try to open up and try to listen to the information you're being given. Take it in, examine it from all sides, because there is so much for us to learn and so much for us to put down and lay aside as white folks. Ibram Kendi, who is one of the foremost experts on race in the country and the author of a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist, has said that all of our lives, racism has been raining down on all of us, whatever our color and race. We don't even know that we're wet because the rain has just kept coming down on us all of our life. And when you begin to practice anti-racism, it's as though somebody has handed you an umbrella. And for the first time in your life, you're dry and you feel like what it's like and how wonderful it is to be dry for once. And we shouldn't be embarrassed once that umbrella is given to us. I think sometimes we shut down in our shame and embarrassment and defensiveness, but instead he invites us to feel gratitude for that person who has handed us the umbrella. So I want to share some stories of how I've been handed an umbrella in my life and the journey that I've been on through the work we're doing at Faith in Public Life. We're working with over 25,000 religious leaders all over the country, and we have offices in a number of states. And in 2016, when we were helping with a voter turnout program in my home state of Georgia, where I was born, where my family still lives, we had organizers using my mom's house in Buckhead, Atlanta as a home base. Now, Buckhead is much like Bethesda. It is almost all white, very well-to-do. And she was generous in offering us her house and her garage to store all of our materials in. And I lightly one day asked one of our African-American organizers, she was a young woman in her 20s, she had gone to an Ivy League school, and I just kind of cavalierly asked her, hey, could you go by and drop off some materials and then pick up some of the new cards we need? And she looked at me, she paused, and then shyly said, you know, I was taught that Black girls do not go into garages in Buckhead, Atlanta. They don't drive around in Buckhead, Atlanta. In that small interaction, God was calling to me, Jen, there are Black realities you do not see. My organization is building faith networks throughout the country, as I said, and we have a really strong program in Ohio and based in Columbus, but we're working all over the state. It's led by Dan and Blythe, who are two pastors. And in 2016, we forged a coalition of white and Black clergy that took up the issue of police brutality in Columbus after the shooting of an 11-year-old boy. We researched and we outlined a theory of change. And we learned that there was money in the mayor's budget for crisis intervention training, a training that has been proven to reduce police violence. And I thought to myself, the mayor is a Democrat. There is money in the budget, and we can do this. It's been 4 years now, and our coalition is really strong and broad. It even includes members of the police department who came to us behind the scenes and wanted to help, and they've been willing to come forward. Our proposal was really well researched, but we have made very little progress in these 4 years. The mayor seemed responsive at first, but that turned out to be a farce. In fact, he kind of co-opted some of our initial support and partnership. And through all of this, we've learned that the police union is actually more powerful than the mayor. The police union gets loads of corporate funding. It funds elections. It makes threats to withdraw police. It threatens workers who break ranks. It gets jobs back for cops who murder Black men and boys. It feels like, honestly, that we're sometimes up against an organized crime syndicate, rather called a police union, rather than working in a democracy. So here was my learning. In my white privilege, I thought that I could fix things through reason, through research, through negotiation. As a white blonde girl, I thought that we could show everybody how to get this thing done. I was naive. Police brutality is not the lack of training. It's not the mistaken misplacement of resources that are already in the budget to do this. It's caused by institutional racism. It is a power arrangement with economic goals. And it's not just me learning this. As I talk to faith communities all around the country, I'm learning that they've experienced exactly the same thing. Since Rodney King, since Ferguson, nothing has changed. Again, God said to me, Jen, there are Black realities that you do not see. Sometimes things are broken and they're not fixable. They have to be replaced. My colleague, the Reverend Dr. Susan Smith, who's a Black pastor in Ohio, told me just this week. She continued in a meeting I was in with Ohio clergy by Zoom, and she said, we have been applying Band-Aids and zip ties to problems of human rights and human decency since the inception of this country. The system needs to be done over, replaced, so that the glorious words of freedom and justice and liberty for all can be realized. Nobody ever wants to start over, she said soberly. It is easier to fix than to replace. But when replacement is due, it is due. Fixing will no longer work. So what can take its place? So when the protests first broke out here in Washington, D.C., I joined Black Lives Matter D.C., their email list and their Twitter. And I'll have to admit, when I first heard the slogan defund police years ago, I thought to myself, good luck with that. And I kind of worried about it because I was like, you know, the folks that I know in my network, they're not going to understand that. We need something that communicates more effectively. So that's my being honest here. And then when I saw that the Black Lives Matter protesters had added the words defund police to Mayor Bowser's Black Lives Matter plaza that she painted, I began to research the question. And I found myself challenged. I learned that in DC, there were a number of questionable police shootings that have gone uninvestigated. I learned that Mayor Bowser continues to propose more money for the police budget, $34 million increase to a $500 million budget, while homelessness budgets are being slashed. I reflected on my Ohio experience and how reform did not work. And I learned that policing itself is founded in slavery. It was set up as a system of slave catchers in the Fugitive Slave Act to catch slaves. God is doing a new thing. Do we perceive it? In America, we criminalize everything. If you're poor and you can't pay a parking ticket, you go to jail. If you use drugs chaotically, you go to jail rather than rehabilitation. If you lost your job and you sleep on a park bench because there's no safety net, you go to jail. If you're an immigrant who fled violence to get your kids to safety, you go to jail. We're criminalizing everybody and every problem rather than providing support. So in studying the issue, I've learned a little more about what this defund police vision means. It means removing funding for the police and investing it in Black communities. What might that look like? It might mean more public money for drug treatment, for mental health services, for ending homelessness, instead of funding the police to do that work. And many of the police themselves have said they are overworked and overextended and not trained to do the kind of work they're being asked to do. So God is doing a new thing, a vision of a new world, one that is realizable, is being lifted up. Imagine a world where some folks are sleeping on a park bench and a city employee, rather than police, comes by and checks to see if they need a place to sleep, food, or health care. Imagine you're experiencing domestic violence and an unarmed conflict intervention specialist de-escalates the situation. Or you're driving down the road and you don't realize your brake lights aren't working, and a city employee signals to you and says, how about I replace that brake light? These situations represent a large percentage of how the police get involved, and many of these situations result in jail time rather than care. Many escalate violence and result in death because the police are not trained and equipped to handle these situations. So God is doing a new thing. Can we see it? Recently, First Congregational Church of Oakland pledged to stop calling the police. Instead, they've opted to make a list of community agencies that can resolve any issues that they may have. In an NPR interview, they shared, "We believe when people, especially white people, default to calling the police when something goes wrong or when they feel uncomfortable, it's basically just outsourcing crisis management, safety, and potential violence to the state." One of the lay leaders named Nicola shared, "This is exactly what the religious leaders said when Jesus was arrested. They said, we can't kill him, but you can. Our law forbids it, but you can do it." They've decided that not calling the police is a spiritual practice for them. It was really cool to hear this analysis, this deeply theological analysis vision on NPR in the secular news media, and to think about it. I spent time on the issue of defunding policing today because it is the matter at hand today. Ibram Kendi, he's one of the leading experts, I quoted him earlier, he tweeted yesterday, "Any return to normal is a return to the normality of racism. Only radical change, a whole new vision of who we could be, can save this nation now." I believe that the journey to take the blinders caused by whiteness off is a spiritual discipline for all of us that has too long been put aside by myself and others. But what I'm learning is that I have work to do. A radical shift in white self-understanding is required in order for this nation to become the democracy that we have never actually been. And so I'm learning not to edit and soften slogans and visions of those who cry for help. For me, this is becoming a new spiritual discipline. Daily, I consider something that I thought I knew and that I have to rethink. And weekly, my staff now meets to examine how white supremacy shows up in our work. And again, we are a social justice organization. Many of us have read lots of books on racism and we've tried really hard to understand. But we're realizing we need the discipline of setting this time aside to hold one another accountable. So as we study whiteness as a congregation, I hope you'll also think about how whiteness kills white people. This is about all of us. We need to only look at the failed response to COVID and how suspicion of government, whipped up originally around racism, has resulted in so many being able to believe conspiracy theories and refusing to do what's needed to contain the virus. Like I said, my organization for the past 2 years has been on a journey to be an anti-racist organization. And what that has meant for us is that we re-examine all of our policies, all of our work culture, and our programs. We actually have a white caucus where white folks do our own work to remove the blinders that we have. And I've been challenged as I do that work. I'm becoming a better leader. I'm becoming kinder to myself and my own imperfections. I am rejecting my desire to always be perfect and to be embarrassed when I fall on my face. My fear of conflict and my embracing the fact that I will make mistakes are things that I am working on. So Isaiah and the protesters today are telling us God is on the move. They are asking us, do we see it? How will we respond? Can we hear those cries, take them in and act on them? We're mostly a white congregation and we live probably in white neighborhoods. And I can tell you that makes us blind. But we can still learn if we want to grow spiritually, if we want to see God's new thing. It's time to push our understanding of history, our perspectives, and our future. All the world is falling apart. I know we are so tired today. We are challenged at every turn. It is hard just to even get to the grocery store. I feel that. But take heart today. God is on the move. God really is. And a new thing is about to come to us through the feet of Black-led organizing. God is calling you forward and making a way for all of us together in the wilderness that we now face. And what a joy it is to be a part of God's new thing. Amen.